The discovery of the ship was not expected. In fact, it was the last thing anyone could have anticipated. Humanity had seen its share of strange phenomena, asteroids, comets, and distant dying stars, but nothing had prepared them for the silent, massive ship that appeared out of nowhere, drifting into their solar system. It was in the outer reaches, near the asteroid belt where a group of observatories first spotted the object. At first they thought it was a large asteroid, something that had simply been on a long, slow path toward the sun. But when the object didn't follow the predictable movement of asteroids, when it made no attempts to rotate or follow the laws of motion they were familiar with, their alarms rang. This was no asteroid. The ship was enormous, more than 3 times the size of the largest human-built space station. It was shaped like a hollow ring with twisted metal structures extending outward like a shattered wheel. It looked ancient, damaged, and yet it emitted a strange rhythmic pulse that human scientists had never seen before. The signal was faint, but it was unmistakable. Someone or something was trying to communicate. Soon, word of the discovery spread, and the entire world was on edge. Was it a sign of an alien invasion? Or perhaps a long-lost relic from a time before humanity had ever thought to look to the stars? The United Nations quickly formed a task force, sending a team of astronauts and scientists on a mission to investigate. The mission was named Project Horizon. The goal was clear: determine the origin of the ship and find out who or what was inside. The spacecraft. The Argonaut was chosen for the mission. It was one of humanity's best vessels, equipped for deep space exploration and capable of carrying a team of 8 astronauts. Captain Sarah Decker, a seasoned pilot and leader, was put in charge of the mission. Along with her were 4 scientists, 2 engineers, and a medical officer, James Callahan, young and humble medtech who had always dreamed of something more than routine hospital work. This mission, however, was far from routine. They arrived at the alien ship 2 weeks later, their ship docking with the massive object. The outside of the ship was covered in strange symbols and patterns, markings, that seemed like nothing the human crew had ever seen. Some of the symbols glowed faintly, pulsing in a rhythm that matched the signal they had detected. Captain Decker led the team as they slowly made their way into the ship through an open hatch. The first 2 stepped foot on the foreign vessel. The interior was darker than expected. Strange alien machinery lined the walls, some of it still humming with power. But it was the silence that struck them first. There was no noise. No hum of engines, no sound of life, just the soft, eerie buzz of unknown technology. As they ventured deeper into the ship, they found themselves in a large chamber. In the center of the room, on a platform of what appeared to be crystal, lay a single figure. It was an alien woman, but unlike any species they had encountered before. She was humanoid, but her skin was a pale shade of blue, and her features were delicate and sharp. Her long hair shimmered like liquid silver, and her body was in a deep state of unconsciousness. Lying still as if she were a statue, the team froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. The woman's appearance was both beautiful and haunting, but it was clear she had been injured. Her body was battered and bruised, and her breathing was shallow, faint. "Is she alive?" one of the scientists asked in a whisper. His voice barely audible in the silence of the chamber. Captain Decker stepped forward. "I think so. She's just in very poor condition." James Callahan, the medical officer, moved closer. He had seen countless injuries in his time as a medtech, but nothing like this. The woman's body showed signs of intense trauma, broken limbs, bruising, and deep gashes that had been poorly treated. But there was something else that James noticed, something far more unsettling. There was a strange energy radiating from her, almost as if she was connected to the ship itself. "She's connected to the ship," James muttered under his breath, his eyes widening as he examined her more closely. The team quickly set to work. They used their medical equipment to stabilize her, performing basic life-saving procedures. It was clear that the woman was not from Earth, but they had no idea where she came from or what species she belonged to. Her physiology was vastly different from anything humanity had studied. Her body was unlike anything they had seen. There was no trace of blood, only a strange, glowing fluid that seemed to flow through her veins. As they worked, Captain Decker turned to the communications officer. "Can we send a message to Earth? Let them know we've found someone alive." The officer nodded. "It's going to take a while. We're out of direct communication range. We'll have to relay the signal back to Earth via a series of satellites." "Keep trying," Decker ordered. Hours passed, and the team continued their work in silence. The alien woman, who they had come to call Naira, based on the markings they found on her ship, remained unconscious. But every now and then, she would stir, her hand twitching slightly or her eyes flickering under her eyelids. It was a sign that she was still alive, still fighting to survive. James Callahan found himself drawn to her. There was something about Naira that captivated him, not just her otherworldly beauty, but the sheer vulnerability she exuded. She was a survivor, much like humanity had always been. But she was also broken, a relic of a race that seemed to have fallen into ruin. "What happened to you?" James muttered softly as he worked on her arm, repairing a broken bone. "Where are you from? And why are you here?" But the answers didn't come. Naira's mind remained locked away in the depths of unconsciousness. As the hours dragged on, the team continued their work, sure of what would happen next. Outside the ship, the universe continued to turn. Unaware of the momentous discovery humanity had just made, the world's leaders began to debate the implications of finding an alien species. Some saw it as an opportunity, a chance to connect with a more advanced civilization. Others saw it as a threat, a danger to humanity's existence. But for James, none of that mattered. He wasn't concerned with politics or military might. He had only one thought in mind: saving her. He couldn't help but wonder how much longer she could survive. But one thing was certain: Naira was not the last of her kind. And whatever secrets she held, they would soon be uncovered. The hours bled into days. On the ship, time had no meaning. The crew of the Argonaut worked tirelessly, doing everything they could to help Naira, the alien woman they had discovered. Yet, she remained in a deep, unconscious state. Her condition was improving, but at a slow pace. Every once in a while, her fingers would twitch or her chest would rise slightly, but nothing more. It was as if her mind and body were locked in a battle for survival. James Callahan, the medical officer, was the one who spent the most time by her side. He had always been drawn to people in need, but something about Naira made him feel even more connected to her. It wasn't just that she was an alien. It wasn't just that she was a survivor of something unknown. It was the feeling that she was special, that there was something more to her story, something he wasn't yet able to understand. The crew had tried everything they could to communicate with her. They spoke to her, hoping that the sound of a human voice would bring her back. But Naira never responded. She lay there still and silent, as if the weight of her past had trapped her in a state of frozen silence. James often wondered what had happened to her. Where was her home? What was the story behind the ship? He had so many questions, but all he could do was wait. One evening, as the lights of the space station flickered faintly in the distance, James sat by Naira's side again. His fingers lightly brushed against her skin, checking her vitals. He wasn't sure if it was the right thing to do, but he whispered to her anyway. "I won't leave you," he said softly. "You're not alone anymore." To his surprise, Naira's eyes fluttered open. Her gaze was unfocused at first, as if she were seeing the world for the first time. Her pupils were dilated, her expression distant. But as James' words settled in, something shifted. Her eyes slowly turned toward him, and for the first time, there was a spark of recognition. Double quotes. "Who, are you?" she whispered, her voice hoarse, strained from the silence. James froze. The sound of her voice was like music to his ears, but it was also filled with a sadness that cut deeper than anything he had ever heard. He leaned closer, trying to steady his breath, his heart pounding in his chest. "My name is James Callahan," he replied softly, his voice calm but full of emotion. "I'm with the crew of the Argonaut. You're safe now. We're here to help." Naira blinked several times, her eyes still cloudy with confusion. She tried to move, but her body was weak, unresponsive. She let out a soft, pained groan, her fingers twitching as she attempted to push herself up. James quickly placed a gentle hand on her shoulder to steady her. "Don't try to move too quickly," he said, his voice filled with concern. "You're still recovering. You've been through a lot." For a moment, Naira didn't respond. She simply stared at him, her gaze distant and unreadable. Then, with great effort, she spoke again. "Why? Why are you helping me?" Her voice trembled. I am the last of my kind. You should be afraid of me." "Afraid of you? Why would I be afraid of you?" Naira's eyes flickered with a mixture of disbelief and sorrow. She closed her eyes briefly, as though searching for words. "You don't understand. My people, they were destroyed. We were once a powerful race, feared and respected across the galaxy. But I have failed them. I was chosen to survive, but now I am nothing." James shook his head slowly. "I don't think you're nothing. You're still here. You survived. That counts for something. And I'm not afraid of you, Naira. I believe you can be healed. I believe there's more to your story." For a long moment, Naira said nothing. She simply watched him, as though weighing his words. James could see the conflict in her eyes. She had been through something that no one could fully understand, the loss of an entire civilization. Of a race once proud and powerful, she had been broken, not just physically, but emotionally as well. The weight of her past hung heavily on her. Like a shadow she could not escape. "I don't deserve your help," Naira whispered, her voice thick with sorrow. "I should have died with my people." James leaned in closer, his voice gentle. "Everyone deserves help, and no one deserves to be alone. You don't have to carry this burden by yourself." Her eyes searched his face, as though trying to read him, to understand why a stranger would offer her such kindness. Slowly, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Naira," she said softly. "I was born on a world called Arender. My people, the Twa, were once the rulers of a vast empire. We were ancient, wise, and powerful. We knew the stars, and we traveled among them. But we were betrayed. Our civilization fell apart from within. My people fought each other, and in the end, it destroyed us." James listened carefully, his heart aching for the woman who had already lost so much. "What happened to the rest of your people?" he asked gently. Naira's eyes clouded over with pain. "They are gone. There are no survivors except for me. The few of us who escaped, we were hunted. I was the last one to make it out. My ship. It was damaged during the attack, and I was forced to flee into deep space. I don't know how I ended up here, but I do know that I have failed." James placed a hand on her arm, offering comfort. "You didn't fail. You're here, and you're still fighting. That's all that matters. And you're not alone anymore." Naira stared at him for a long time, as if trying to absorb the truth in his words. Slowly, the tension in her shoulders eased, and she closed her eyes, resting her head against the pillow. "I don't know if I can ever forgive myself for what happened," she said softly. "For the destruction of my people." "You don't have to forgive yourself right now," James replied. "Healing takes time. And we're here to help you. All of us. You're not alone." For the first time since she had awoken, Naira allowed herself to relax, her body sinking into the bed as if the weight of her grief had lessened, even if only slightly. She was still broken. But James could see a flicker of hope in her eyes. A spark that hadn't been there before. The silence in the room was no longer oppressive. It was filled with a quiet understanding, a moment of connection between two beings from vastly different worlds. For James, it was clear. He had made a promise to Naira, a promise that he would never leave her. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that they would face it together, and for Naira. It was the first time she had heard someone speak to her with such kindness, without fear or hatred. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like a relic of the past. She didn't feel like an outcast. In James' eyes, she was simply someone worth saving. In the silence that followed, the two of them shared a quiet moment, each uncertain of what would come next. But for now, there was peace, and that, for both of them, was enough. The days passed, and life aboard the Argonaut settled into a strange rhythm. The crew continued to assist Naira with her recovery, and despite her painful past, she slowly started to heal. James Callahan, more than anyone else, stayed close to her, offering comfort and medical care. There was a quiet understanding between them now, a shared respect. But, despite the gentle progress, the silence still lingered. Naira rarely spoke about the war that had shattered her people, nor did she offer much about the fate of her civilization. She seemed content to focus on healing, one step at a time. Yet there was a sense of unease in the air. As much as James and the others cared for Naira, the reality of her situation was undeniable. She was not the only one who had survived. Her people's enemies, the Talar, had been hunting her down for years. The crew knew that eventually the Talar would come looking for Naira, and when they did, there would be no easy answers. James often found himself wondering about the kind of world Naira had come from. What had her life been like before the destruction? How had she survived so much? And how had she ended up alone, the last of her people? He couldn't help but feel a growing sense of respect for her strength, even in her quiet moments. One evening, as the ship drifted through deep space, an emergency signal broke the quiet atmosphere. It was an encrypted message, the kind that only high-ranking officials could send. The transmission came through from Earth, and Captain Decker wasted no time in pulling the crew together. "We've just received a message from the Galactic Council," Captain Decker announced, her voice serious. "They've been informed of Naira's survival, and they want us to meet with them. The Tuar are also aware of the situation, and they're not happy." A ripple of tension spread through the crew. James exchanged a quick glance with Naira, who was seated nearby, listening closely. She looked concerned, though it was hard to tell whether it was for her own safety or the safety of everyone else. Her gaze remained distant, as though she were already bracing for the worst. Captain Decker continued. "The council has called for a diplomatic meeting. They want to decide what to do with Naira, what role she will play in galactic affairs, and how humanity is involved." James felt the weight of the moment. This was not just about Naira anymore. This was about Earth's future in the galaxy, about humanity's place in a much larger universe. The meeting was scheduled for the following morning. The crew was to prepare for the transmission, which would take place on the main bridge of the Argonaut. James spent the evening pacing, unsure of what to expect. The Tlar were a powerful race, and their reputation for aggression was well known. What if the meeting escalated into something more dangerous? The next day, the ship's bridge was abuzz with activity as they prepared for the transmission. James found himself standing next to Naira, who was looking out the window, lost in thought. Her silver hair shimmered in the low light, and her expression seemed distant, almost sad. "Naira," James said softly, his voice hesitant. You ready for this? You don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with. Just let us know what you need." Naira turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," she said, her voice quiet. "The Tlar, they will demand things of me. They will expect me to return and lead them, but I'm not that person anymore. I don't have the strength to carry their burden." James placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to be what they expect. You're not their ruler. You're yourself. And that's enough." She nodded slowly, but James could see the doubt in her eyes. He knew that whatever happened, Naira would need to find her own way. She couldn't simply go back to her past, and she couldn't run from it forever either. The transmission began, and the screen flickered to life. On the other side of the universe, the Galactic Council representatives appeared on the screen. They were a mix of different alien species, all watching the crew of the Argonaut with keen interest. They had no time for pleasantries. The Tlar had already made their presence known, and the council was focused on how to deal with the situation. The most imposing figure on the screen was Dalar, the representative of the Tlar. He was tall and broad, with dark, smooth skin and piercing red eyes that seemed to glow with intensity. His presence radiated authority, and his voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of a ruler. "I speak for the Tlar," Dalar said, his tone flat but commanding. "The last of our people lives, and she is aboard your ship. We demand her return. The Tlar do not tolerate disobedience, and her survival is an affront to everything we stand for. She was born to lead, and yet she chooses to hide among you." The room fell silent. James could feel the tension rising as Dalar's words hung in the air. He glanced at Naira, who was standing beside him. She was tense, her body language closed off, and her eyes narrowed. "Dalar," Captain Decker said, her voice calm but firm. "Naira is not a tool to be used for your political ambitions. She is a survivor. She has lived through the destruction of her people. She doesn't owe you anything." Dalar's eyes narrowed. "You think you understand the Tlar? You are nothing but children, playing with forces beyond your comprehension. Naira's survival is the last thread of our legacy. She is to live, she must return to us, and take her rightful place as our leader." "I don't want to lead," Naira said suddenly, her voice cutting through the tension. "And I don't want to go back to a place that is nothing but ashes. The TLR destroyed themselves, and I have no place among them. I have no people. I am the last of my kind, and I will not return to lead an empire that no longer exists." The room was stunned into silence. Dalar's gaze shifted to Naira, his face hardening as he processed her words. "You speak of ashes," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You were born to rule. And yet you have chosen to live as a coward." "I am not a coward," Naira said, her voice steady now. "I am a survivor, and I will not let the past dictate who I am. I will not allow my people's mistakes to define my future." Dalar's expression remained stone-faced. But James could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Naira had just challenged him, and not just as a survivor, but as an individual with her own agency. "We do not need to go back to the past," Naira continued, her voice gaining strength. "We can build something new, we can start again. I will not be part of the Talaris mistakes. If they want to destroy themselves, that is their choice. But I choose to live. I choose to live on my own terms." For a moment, the room was quiet, and Dalar said nothing. Finally, he spoke, his voice cold. "You have made your choice, Naira. But know this, the Talar do not forget." Naira met his gaze firmly. "Then let the Talar forget me. I will never be a part of their war again." The transmission ended, and the tension in the room was palpable. The crew exchanged uncertain looks, but James could see the relief on Naira's face. For the first time since he had met her, she seemed at peace. "We'll protect you," James said softly, his voice full of conviction. "You're not alone anymore." Naira nodded, a faint smile crossing her face. "I know, and I'm not afraid anymore." The days that followed the diplomatic meeting were filled with tension, but also with unexpected hope. The crew of the Argonaut now had an uncertain peace with the Talar. The immediate threat had been pushed aside, but James knew the danger wasn't over. Naira was still the last of her kind, a living reminder of a once great civilization that had crumbled. The Tlar had made it clear that they would never forget. But Naira had made it equally clear that she would not go back to them. The decision to stand by Naira, to protect her and offer her a new life, was no longer just about one alien woman's survival. It was about a statement, a new chapter in humanity's history. For the first time, Earth was faced with an opportunity to shape its place in the larger galactic community. But it would not come without challenges. The Tlar, even with their threats, were not the only concern. Other species in the galaxy who had watched the exchange with great interest began to react. Some saw humanity's actions as a sign of strength. Others saw it as a dangerous move that could lead to war. No one knew what the future would hold, but one thing was certain. Humanity was now standing at the edge of something vast. Something unknown. James Callahan spent his days working alongside Naira, continuing her recovery. Despite the difficulty of her past, she began to open up more to him, sharing small details about her homeworld of Arender. Through her stories, he learned that the Tlar were once a peaceful people, wise and prosperous. But all of that changed when a group of power-hungry leaders began to corrupt their society, leading to civil war. In the end, it wasn't an outside force that destroyed them, it was their own choices. Naira, though once destined to rule, had not been able to stop the collapse of her people. The guilt weighed heavily on her, but James, through his kindness and patience, made sure she knew that she wasn't to blame. One day, as the Argonaut drifted through space, a message arrived from Earth's United Nations. It was a call to action, but not in the way anyone expected. "We've received an urgent report," Captain Decker announced to the crew. "A massive anomaly has been detected near the edge of the galaxy. It's unlike anything we've ever seen before. It's pulling in entire star systems, and it's growing. The room fell silent. Anomalies were not new to space exploration, but this was different. The scope of the phenomenon was far greater than anything humanity had encountered. It was moving quickly, and it was consuming everything in its path. "We've been ordered to investigate," Captain Decker continued. "The United Nations wants us to assess the situation. If this anomaly is as dangerous as the reports suggest, Earth may be facing its first true galactic crisis." James looked at Naira. She had been unusually quiet since the meeting with the Tlar, but now her eyes were focused on the screen, her face pale with concern. This anomaly was unlike anything she had ever encountered either. She was once part of a great civilization, but even her people's knowledge couldn't prepare them for such a force. "I think it's time we acted," Naira said quietly. Her voice, though soft, was filled with determination. "This anomaly, it may be the very thing that destroyed my people. We cannot ignore it." James turned to her, surprised by her sudden confidence. She had spent so much time struggling with her past, but now she seemed to have found a purpose again. "We will investigate it together," he replied, his voice steady. "Whatever happens, we face it as a team." The Argonaut was equipped with the latest technology. But even with all of humanity's advancements, no one knew what they were walking into. The anomaly was located in a distant sector of space, far beyond any known star systems. The crew, however, understood the gravity of the situation. They had to act quickly before the anomaly expanded even further. The time to hesitate had passed. As the Argonaut set its course toward the anomaly, tension mounted aboard the ship. Everyone on the crew was busy preparing for the unknown. Engineers worked on the ship's systems. Scientists gathered data from every corner of the galaxy to help understand what they were up against. And Captain Decker kept everyone focused. James and Naira spent long hours together in the medical bay, preparing for any emergency that might arise. Though Naira had regained much of her strength, she was still healing from her injuries. James couldn't shake the feeling that she was not only recovering physically, but also finding a new sense of purpose. Her eyes no longer carried the same burden of guilt they once had. She was coming back to life just as the crew was. "We need to figure out what this anomaly is," Naira said one evening as she studied the data on a terminal. "It may be a weapon, or something worse. I've never seen anything like it." "Do you think it's a weapon from the Tlar?" James asked, concerned. "No," Naira answered, shaking her head. "It's not their style. The Tlar are powerful, but they are not reckless. This feels different, like something ancient, something that was forgotten. My people knew of forces like this, but we were never able to control them. It was one of the reasons for our downfall." The tension between the two of them grew as they prepared for their approach to the anomaly. It felt as if the very fabric of space was changing, pulling them toward the unknown. Naira's warnings echoed in James' mind. This was a force beyond anything they had ever seen before. As they neared the edge of the anomaly's reach, the crew began to see strange phenomena. The stars in the distance seemed to flicker and warp, as if they were being pulled by an invisible hand. The fabric of space itself felt fragile, as if it could snap at any moment. "We're getting close," Captain Decker said, her voice filled with a mix of awe and fear. "Everyone, prepare for what comes next." The Argonaut began to slow as they approached the center of the anomaly. The ship's systems were beginning to strain under the pressure of the gravitational forces pulling them in. The crew braced themselves as the ship continued to move forward. Naira stood beside James, watching the view through the window. The stars seemed to swirl, twisting in ways that were impossible to explain. She placed a hand on the glass, as if trying to make sense of the chaos outside. "This is it," she whispered. "Whatever this is, we must face it together." James stood next to her, his resolve strengthening. "We will," he replied. "No matter what happens, we're in this together." The anomaly was close now. The unknown stretched out before them, a massive, terrifying force that defied all understanding. But James knew one thing for sure. Humanity's resolve would not falter. Whether they faced the wrath of the Tlar or an unimaginable cosmic force, they would stand united. Together, they would face whatever came next. The Argonaut moved slowly through the heart of the anomaly, its crew tense, each person holding their breath. The very fabric of space seemed to tremble around them. Stars flickered, and the once steady hum of the ship's engines felt distant, as if the universe itself was pulling them into a place where time and space no longer obeyed the same rules. "Captain," Decker's voice came over the intercom, her tone calm but filled with the weight of the unknown. "All crew, prepare for possible turbulence. We're entering the core of the anomaly now. Stay alert. We don't know what we're dealing with." James Callahan stood by the medical bay watching the crew and Naira. He noticed that Naira, although she had recovered physically, seemed lost in thought, her face pale and her hands trembling slightly. Her past weighed heavily on her, but it wasn't just the memories of her people's fall that troubled her now. This anomaly, this unknown force, seemed to resonate with something deeper in her. It felt, to James, like it reminded her of something from her long-lost civilization. Something ancient and dangerous. "Naira," James said, approaching her carefully. "Are you okay?" Naira looked up at him, her expression unreadable. She had always been calm and composed, but now there was something different. The fear was not for herself. It was for humanity. She could feel it in the very air around them, the strange pull of the anomaly, the unseen force that beckoned them forward. "I've seen this before," she said softly, her voice distant. "Not this exact thing, but something like it. My people knew about anomalies like this. They were powerful and dangerous." "Dangerous?" James asked, his voice filled with concern. "You mean we might be walking into something we can't escape?" Naira nodded, her eyes darkening. "The Tlar were once the masters of many such phenomena, but we never truly understood them. Some say these anomalies are the remnants of a civilization older than any of us. They could be weapons, or they could be something worse, something that even the greatest civilizations could not control." James stepped closer to her, his voice steady. "We'll face it together, Naira. Whatever it is, we have each other. And the rest of the crew, we're not alone." She gave him a faint, grateful smile, but there was still a trace of fear in her eyes. She wasn't sure if they were prepared for what lay ahead. None of them were. The truth was, they had no idea what kind of power they were about to encounter. But one thing was certain. Humanity had already proven it was capable of surviving the impossible. The Argonaut shook as it passed deeper into the core of the anomaly. The once stable readings on their instruments now fluctuated wildly. The ship's lights flickered and strange noises filled the corridors, a low hum that seemed to vibrate through the metal of the ship. The crew was silent, each person staring at their screens. Tracking the changes, waiting for something to happen. "We're entering a distortion field," the lead scientist, Dr. Voss, said, his voice sharp with urgency. "Space itself is warping. If we don't correct our course soon, we'll be pulled into something we can't escape." Captain Decker's hand gripped the arm of her chair. "Can we reverse course?" "No," Dr. Voss replied, his voice grim. "We're past the point of no return. If we don't act fast, the Argonaut will be lost. And so will we." James' heart pounded in his chest. He turned to Naira, who was still watching the screens, her face expressionless. It was clear to him that she understood the gravity of their situation more than anyone else. She had seen destruction before, her people's collapse, their fall from grace. But this felt different. Suddenly, a deep, rumbling noise shook the ship, and the entire crew was thrown off balance. The lights went out completely, plunging them into darkness. The hum of the ship's engines stopped, replaced by a disorienting silence. "We've lost power," Captain Decker said, her voice tense. "What the hell is happening?" In the pitch black of the ship, James could hear the crew scrambling to react. But it was Naira who spoke next, her voice clear and strong despite the chaos. "The anomaly is alive," she said. "This isn't just a natural phenomenon. It's a force, a consciousness. It's reaching out to us." James turned to her. "What do we do?" Naira closed her eyes, her breathing steady. "We need to make contact with it. There's a way, but it's dangerous. If we can communicate, maybe we can learn what it wants." we may be able to control it. How do we do that? James asked. I don't know yet, Naira replied, her voice filled with uncertainty. But we have to try. We have no choice. The anomaly is pulling us in. If we don't understand it soon, it will consume us. Captain Decker, who had been listening closely, gave a nod. All right, everyone. We're going to follow Naira's lead. We're not giving up on this. Not yet. The crew worked together in the dark, gathering the instruments they needed to access the anomaly's core. Naira guided them with the same quiet confidence that she had shown since their first meeting. She didn't hesitate, even though she knew the danger that lay ahead. Her people had failed before, but she was determined to ensure that humanity would not share the same fate. The crew was able to restore partial power, and the lights flickered back on. Their instruments came online slowly, giving them just enough information to continue their work. But it was clear that time was running out. The pull of the anomaly was growing stronger. The ship was beginning to groan under the pressure of the gravitational forces. We don't have much time, Dr. Voss said, his voice urgent. Whatever Naira is suggesting, we need to do it now. Naira moved quickly, setting up the necessary equipment to attempt contact with the anomaly. She stood before the main console, her hands moving with practiced ease as she connected various wires and systems. The crew watched, unsure of what to expect. I'm opening the communication channel, Naira said, her voice firm. If we're lucky, it will hear us. For a few moments, nothing happened. Then, the lights began to pulse in sync with the anomaly's energy. The entire ship seemed to vibrate with the connection, as though the very core of the Argonaut was becoming one with the strange force outside. James could feel the hair on his neck stand on end as the hum of the ship intensified. Suddenly, a voice echoed in the minds of the crew. It was not a sound, but a presence, ancient, vast, and unknowable. It filled their minds with a sense of awe and fear. You seek to understand me, the voice resonated. But I am beyond your comprehension, the crew gasped, each person fighting to hold on to their sanity as the presence washed over them. It was a feeling of being both small and immense at the same time. Like a single grain of sand in an infinite desert? We are not here to harm you, Naira said, her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly. We only wish to understand. There was a pause, a silence that felt like eternity. Then the voice responded. You are a new presence, it said. You are not the first to seek me, but you are different. You will not be destroyed. You will be tested. The tension in the air thickened as the crew waited for the next move. James looked at Naira, who stood tall, unwavering. She had found her place, her voice, not as a leader of a lost civilization, but as someone who had come to terms with her past and was ready to face the future. We are ready, Naira said, her words echoing through the void. We will pass your test. The ship shook again, but this time it was different. The pull of the anomaly began to lessen, as if the force itself was stepping back, waiting. The crew held their breath. They had passed the first test. And perhaps, just perhaps, humanity was about to prove it had a place among the stars.